Kshitigarbha, the earth store or womb Buddha, Bodhisattva. I decided I would do the video on him first. I'll cover the see later. So, and the reason I actually wanted to cover him first is because as far as Buddhas go, as far as Bodhisattvas go, Kshitigarbha represents something quite spectacular. That anyone, no matter how perceivably bad or wrong or evil, is redeemable. And so in order to really explain or cover what Kshitigarbha represents, I'm actually going to read, once I locate it, the invocation from Chanting the Heart, which is a book on Buddhist ceremonies and daily practices from Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh and the monks and nuns of Plon village. Now I need to find, and I probably should have found it before I jumped on, but I'm winging it, found it. So I'm going to read this out and then I'm going to go through and explain it. So we invoke your name, Kshitigarbha. We aspire to learn your way of being present where there is darkness, suffering, oppression, and despair, so we can bring light, hope, relief, and liberation to those places. We are determined not to forget about or abandon those in desperate situations. We will do our best to establish contact with those who cannot find a way out of their suffering, those whose cries for help, justice, equality, and human rights are not being heard. We know that hell can be found in many places on earth. We will do our best not to contribute to creating more hells on earth and to help transform the hells that already exist. We will practice in order to realize the qualities of perseverance and stability, so that, like the earth, we can always be supportive and faithful to those in need. I'll just quickly ring the singing bell. Okay. There are a couple of reasons why Kshitigarbha is probably the first one I turn to with this video. We see in society at the moment a lot of suffering, a lot of disregard for the rights of others. In America, we have President Trump building the wall between America and Mexico. In Australia, we have offshore detention centres where refugees and asylum seekers are being detained essentially indefinitely in horrible conditions, where their need for medical treatment is being completely disregarded, and where there has been a real smear campaign, to essentially demonize them throughout our media. And it's been happening on both sides of path. So Kshitigarbha represents the aspiration to help people in the most desperate situations. Often you hear, why don't we look after our people close to home? Well, if you've ever walked around Adelaide, no matter where you are in Adelaide, mostly in the CBD though, you will see a lot of homeless people. And I'm not going to lie. When I walk past people who are in those situations, I feel guilty. I feel powerless in many ways. So Kshitigarbha represents having that drive to help. I have a good friend of mine who is a chaplain who works as a chaplain in prisons. And I think this is really quite an embodiment of the aspiration of Kshitigarbha as well as Christ. In that, working in such a system, you would see what society would perceive to be the worst of the worst. And even in those situations, Kshitigarbha and Christ would see a potential for redemption. So I think what is also interesting about Kshitigarbha, and I read it out in that invocation, is Kshitigarbha inspires us to look at the darkness around us. Often we like to bury our heads in the sand. Often we get overwhelmed by it. I mean, if you're ever on social media, and if you're a part of an activist circle, you will get flooded daily by differences of opinion, by conflicting arguments, by a cycle of inability to actually talk about the important issues. We get caught up on sound bites. We retreat into ourselves. We push ourselves into our own little worlds, and Kshitigarbha, like Christ, inspires us to look at the darkness, to look at the ugliness around us. Because how can we, no matter what path we're on, whether we're Christian, pagan, Buddhist, Hindu, spiritualist, Luciferian, satanic, whatever, genuinely address the issues we are facing if we bury our heads in the sand? We can't. We can't. And so what we tend to do, or what society likes us to do, is to get caught up on sound bites, fill our heads with so much noise that actually looking at reality for what it is becomes impossible. And so Kshitigarbha, in his very representation, in his symbolism, represents a return to simplicity, stability, the earth. For people who are on the ascension path, and I will get to explaining my difference of opinion with regards to the terminology used. But for those on the ascension path, often what we do is we try and fly so high, so fast that we lose our grounding. And then when things go wrong, as happens all too often as a human being, we completely lose our shit, a collective shit. We go off the rails. So Kshitigarbha reminds us to get back to the earth, to get back to what's simple. And Cyrus does this as well. Get back to the simple, earthy, realistic, common sense approach to things. But also, with regards to the bells, it's wake up, wake up. Wake up from the dream that we are conditioned with. Because often we get so caught up in technology, we get so caught up in Facebook, in Snapchat, Instagram, whatever, that we actually miss what is happening right in front of us. I had a lovely walk last night. I went out under the stars. It was beautiful. Yes, I took some music with me, but I decided to go out and just sing some of my favorite songs under the stars. I like to do that. That's what I like to do. Probably terrorized the neighborhood, but whatever, it's cool. Sometimes you just have to do that. Sometimes you just have to get out into nature and sing. Sometimes you just have to step away from the computer or step away from the phone. What I always find very interesting is when good friends of mine who love their phone, they have their phone on them all the time. They absolutely love their phones. And suddenly the phone goes flat or they leave it at home and panic sets in. Technology has become very much a bubble wrap for us. And without it, we feel lost. Yeah. And you know what? It's happened for me too. I probably handle losing my phone more than most, but even a couple of days after having lost the phone, I constantly go back towards it and I go, where's my phone? And I panic a little bit. Or with my computer. My computer's been playing up a fair bit lately, and a part of me is really anxious about what happens when my computer finally dies, because how am I going to keep in contact with people? I'm back in my hometown. A lot of my friends are still in Adelaide. But yeah, so Kshitigarbha reminds us to get back to simplicity. To get back to simplicity. But to look at the darkness. And that's not to judge the darkness. I think what we often do is we see bad things, and then we, out of a sense of powerlessness, we create conflict. So we see something bad happening and we jump to blame, and they become the enemy. They become the other team, the other side to fight. What I like about Buddha, and not so much Kshitigarbha, but the Buddha as portrayed in the early Buddhist text, the Sutta Nipata, is there's a lot of questions given to him about how do you handle conflict between different philosophies and faith. And his response at every single moment is walk away from it. If you get caught up in a debate about who's right and who's wrong, what school of thought, be it Buddhist or any other thought, you get caught up in those arguments, both sides are stupid. Both sides are wrong. Let it go. Walk away. Just walk away. And that's not to say don't try and change things for the better, but don't get caught up in debates that aren't going to achieve anything. It becomes a spin cycle. We waste a lot of energy, a lot of time, a lot of our own peace of heart and mind on arguments that don't achieve anything. They just don't. So, again, I wanted to touch on Kshitigarbha first, because he's, as an energy, as a guide, the key words are simplicity and grounding and stability. We get so caught up in the drama of life, the drama of conflict, be it political, spiritual, social, whatever, that we lose our stability. And then when situations hit us that are actually very serious, or even not so serious, but they hit us, we can't handle it. We get anxious. I have anxiety. I have depression. Meditation has helped me with that a lot. And it's getting back to self. And by self, I mean, well, actually, no, that's a conversation for another day. That's a huge topic. But getting back to being, just being, that's the key for me anyway. And you know what? People go, well, I can't meditate. I can't sit for hours. Don't sit, walk. Do a task that you love doing. Create something. Because when you create something and you get immersed in the creation of that thing, whatever it is, whether it's a painting or a drawing or I paint miniatures, I assemble and paint miniatures, that's a meditation. If you like doing housework, gardening, go do it. That's a meditation. Meditation is simply an activity that holds your attention and holds your attention fully, that you're fully immersed in. Whether it's dancing around the house singing to your favorite music, do it. That's meditation. It's that stuff that holds your concentration without the distractions, where you kind of lose time. I get it all the time when I read books. I read a book, I get so immersed in the story, and I lose track of time because all that's there is the story and nothing else. And that is a form of meditation. Listen to an audiobook. Lay on your bed, listen to an audiobook. Let the story take you where it needs to take you. That's a meditation. It's getting back to being in the moment. So, yeah, I just might have another look at this because at this invocation, I think there's probably some other point here. Here we are. And that's it, hell. In Buddhism, you do have hells. You have, in Kshitigarbha's sutra on his fundamental vows, he lists all these different types of hell. I now have a copy of that book, but I'm yet to go through it and really work through it. So, but he lists many types of hells. And they come in really weird names, and I might list some of them another day. But what the main point is hell isn't necessarily a location, it's an experience, it's a mindset, it's a state of being, a state of awareness where we get caught up in greed, hatred and delusion, where we get caught up in our suffering. And I just want to say this with Buddhism and with regards to suffering. Suffering is more, the word used is dukkha, and it actually means dissatisfaction. So when we're bored, shitless, when we are bored, when we are distracted, I got distracted just then, car drove past the window. When we are distracted, we can't settle. We become anxious, we become depressed, we become jealous, angry, afraid. So dissatisfaction, we get into these states and it becomes a health state. It really does. We work ourselves up to the point where we can't find peace, and we just get so distraught, and it is like a hell. If anyone's ever had a breakup and all that's going on in your mind is, what could I have said to them? What did I want them to say to me? What could I have done differently? What should they have done differently? Blame is a big one. It becomes a torture, a self-torture, and that's a state of hell. So Kshitigarbha inspires us to acknowledge that there are situations and circumstances in human experience, in society, that are hell states, hell-ish. And the aspiration is twofold. One, not to add to it, or not to create new ones. And two, to try and alleviate the states of hell that are already there. So, yeah, I thought I would throw that out there. Kshitigarbha. And his energy is very earthy. That's why I went with a wooden statue of him, because I wanted something that was earthy. And in his hand is the wish-fulfilling jewel. If you can imagine it like a mini sun. Kshitigarbha is also depicted in Japan in little stone statues as the Bodhisattva Jizo, and is often placed in gardens to help with growing and abundance. So I thought I would start with Jizo, with Kshitigarbha, because within spiritual communities we have a tendency to run away from the darkness, to only go for the light. You can only go for the light. But how can we understand the light if we don't understand its opposite? For me, the spiritual path isn't about one over the other. It's about finding a sensible balance, because my own experience back in 2006, when I had my aha moment, which I will explain in further detail in another video, but my understanding was that good and bad are generally very relative concepts, and light and dark and everything is part of everything else. There is no separateness. There is no separation. It's all there. It just is. The feeling I got was that it's all necessary. It's all part of each other. We have the light and the dark in us. And often we turn like the ego into an enemy, into like a devil figure. But without the ego, people would just walk all over us. What we need is that balance, that wholeness, and that requires, sometimes it requires damage control. Sometimes it requires, what's the word used for, can't remember. But we need control. We need to manage these aspects. Even the light, as beautiful as it is, as it's portrayed, too much light can blind people. Think Paul on the road to Damascus in the Bible, blinded by the light of Christ. Some people aren't ready for the light to that intensity. We need to respect that. So I'm going to wrap up now. It's 22 minutes and 17 seconds. Slightly longer video than the last one. That's all right. But I wanted to introduce you to Kshitigarbha, because I just love it. Like, my hands are shaking a little bit just because that's how I am. But his little bells are tinkling. So may Kshitigarbha's gentle, stable, simple presence enlighten your day. May you be grounded. May you step out of the drama. May you see in your own life those self-created elements, and do your little bit that you can to alleviate the suffering for yourself and others around you. I wish you all a beautiful day, and namaste. Be well.